Mediterranean run due east. In the next place, those who have been through have told me that there are no tides as in the northern seas, but that the current runs ever, like a river, to the east." "If that be so," Edmund said, "we must have mistaken our way, for here what current there is runs to the west. Tomorrow morning, instead of proceeding farther, we will cross to the opposite side, and will follow that down until we strike upon the right channel." In the morning sail was again made, and crossing what was really the Bay of Cadiz, they sailed on till they arrived at the mouth of the straits. There was no doubt now that they were right. The width of the channel, its direction, and the steady current through it, all corresponded with what Siegbert had heard, and proceeding a mile along they cast anchor. They soon opened communications with the natives, who, although speaking a tongue unknown to them, soon comprehended by their gestures and the holding up of articles of barter that their intentions were friendly. Trade was established, and there was now nothing to do but to await the coming of the galleys. "I would," Edmund said, as when evening was closing he looked across the straits at the low hills on the opposite side, "that this passage was narrower. Sweyn will doubtless have men on board his ship who have sailed in these seas before, and will not need to grope his way along as we have done. If he enters the straits at night we shall see nothing of him, and the current runs so fast that he would sweep speedily by. It is possible indeed that he has already passed. If he continued to row down the shores of France all the time we were lying windbound, he would have had so long a start when the east wind began to blow that, although the galleys carry but little sail, they might well have been here some days before us. Sweyn would be anxious to join Hasting as soon as he could. The men would be thirsting for booty, and would make but short halt anywhere. I will stay but a week. If in that time they come not, we will enter this southern sea and seek the fleet of Hasting. When we find that, we shall find Sweyn. But I fear that the search will be a long one, for these people speak not our tongue, and we shall have hard work in gaining tidings of the whereabouts of the Northmen's fleet." Day and night a vigilant watch was kept up from the masthead of the Dragon, but without success. Each day they became more and more convinced that Sweyn must be ahead of them, and on the morning of the seventh day they lifted their anchor and proceeded through the straits. Many had been the consultations between Edmund and his friends, and it had been determined at last to sail direct for Rome. Siegbert knew that by sailing somewhat to the north of east, after issuing from the passage, they would in time arrive at Italy. At Rome there was a monastery of Saxon monks, and through them they would be able to obtain full information as to the doings and whereabouts of the squadron of Hasting. Scarcely were they through the straits than the wind, veering to the southeast, prevented them from making the course they had fixed on, but they were able to coast along by the shore of Spain. They put into several small ports as they cruised up, but could obtain no intelligence of the Danes, being unable to converse except by signs. When they reached Marseilles they were pleased to meet with Franks, with whom they could converse, and hire a pilot acquainted with the coasts of the Mediterranean. They learned that Hasting and his fleet had harried the coasts of Provence and Italy, that the Genoese galleys had had several engagements with them, but had been worsted. The Danish fleet was now off the coast of Sicily, and the Northmen were ravaging that rich and fertile island. They were reported to have even threatened to ascend the Tiber and to burn Rome. Having obtained the services of a man who spoke both the Italian and Frankish tongues, Edmund started again. He first went to Genoa, as he thought that the people there might be despatching another fleet against the Northmen, in which case he would have joined himself to them, but on his arrival there he was well entertained by the Genoese when they learned through the interpreter who they were, and that they had come from England as enemies of the Danes. Edmund and his Saxons were much surprised at the splendour of Genoa, which immensely surpassed anything they had hitherto seen in the magnificence of its buildings, the dress and appearance of its inhabitants, the variety of the goods displayed by the traders, and the wealth and luxury which distinguished it. It was indeed their first sight of civilization, and Edmund felt how vastly behind was northern Europe, and understood for the first time Alfred's extreme eagerness to raise the condition of his people. On the other hand, the Genoese were surprised at the dress and appearance of the Saxons. The crew of the Dragon were picked men. In their strength and stature, the width of their soldiers, and the muscles of their arms, and, above all, their fair hair and blue eyes, greatly astonished the Genoese. Edmund and his companions might have remained in Genoa and received entertainment and hospitality from its people for a long time, but after a stay of a day or two, having obtained the various stores necessary for their voyage, Edmund determined to proceed. 3 of the young Genoese nobles, fired by the story which they heard of the adventures which the Dragon had gone through, and desirous of taking part in any action which she might fight against the Danes, begged leave to accompany them. Edmund gladly acceded to the request, as their presence would be of great utility in other ports at which the Dragon might touch. At Genoa, Edmund procured garments for his men similar to those worn by the Italian soldiers and sailors, and here he sold to the gold and silversmiths a large number of articles of value which they had captured from the Danes, or with which the Count Eudes and his people of Paris had presented them. The Dragon differed but little in appearance from the galleys of the Genoese, and Edmund determined, when he approached the shores when the Northmen were plundering, to pass as a Genoese ship, for should the news come to Sweyn's eyes that a Saxon galley was in the Mediterranean, it might put him on his guard, as he would believe that she was specially in pursuit of his own vessel. On arriving at the mouth of the Tiber, the Dragon ascended the river and anchored under the walls of the imperial city. The Genoese nobles had many friends and relations there, and Edmund, Egbert, and Siegbert were at once installed as guests in a stately palace. The Pope, upon hearing that the strange galley which had anchored in the river was a Saxon, sent an invitation to its commander to visit him, and Edmund and his kinsmen were taken by their Italian friends to his presence. The Pope received them most graciously, and after inquiring after King Alfred and the state of things in England, asked how it was that a Saxon ship has made so long a voyage. Edmund explained that he was in search of a Danish damsel, who had once shown him great kindness, and who had been carried off from her father by one of the Vikings of Hastings' fleet. When he said that they had taken part in the defence of Paris, the Holy Father told him that he now recognized his name, for that a full account of the siege had been sent to him by one of the monks there, and that he had spoken much of the valour of a Saxon captain and the crew of his galley, to whom indeed their successful resistance to the Northmen was in no slight degree due. "Would I could aid you, my son, in your enterprise against these northern pirates. The depredations which they are committing on the shores of Italy are terrible indeed, and we are powerless to resist them. They have even threatened to ascend the Tiber and attack Rome, and though I trust that we might resist their attacks, yet rather than such misfortune as a siege should fall upon my people, I have paid a large sum of money to the leader of the Northmen to abstain from coming hither. But I know that the greed of these pirates does but increase with their gains, and that ere long we may see their pagan banner floated before our walls. A few galleys I could man and place under your orders, but in truth the people of this town are not skilled in naval fighting. I have already endeavoured to unite the states of Genoa, Pisa, and Venice against them, for it is only by common effort that we can hope to overwhelm these wolves of the sea." Edmund expressed his thanks to the Pope for his offer, but said that he would rather proceed with the Dragon alone. "She is to the full as swift as the Northmen's vessels," he said, "and although I would right gladly join any great fleet which might be assembled for an attack upon them, I would rather proceed alone than with a few other ships. Not being strong enough to attack their whole armament, I must depend upon stratagem to capture the galley of which I am specially in pursuit, and will, with your permission, set out as soon as I have transformed my ship so that she will pass muster as a galley of Genoa or Venice." The Holy Father gave orders that every assistance should be afforded to Edmund to carry out his designs, and the next morning a large number of artisans and workmen took possession of the Dragon. She was painted from stem to stern with bright colours. Carved woodwork was added to her forecastle and poop, and a great deal of gilding overlaid upon her. The shape of her bow was altered, and so transformed was she that none would have known her for the vessel which had entered the Tiber, and she would have passed without observation as a galley of Genoa. A number of prisoners accustomed to row in the state galleys were placed on board to work the oars, thus leaving the whole of the crew available for fighting purposes, and a state officer was put in command of these galley slaves. The ship was well stored with provisions, and after a farewell interview with the Pope, Edmund and his companions returned on board ship, and the Dragon took her way down the river. The fleet of the Northmen was at Palermo, and keeping under the land, the Saxon ship sailed down the coast to Calabria, and at night crossed near the mouth of the straits to the shore of Sicily. They entered a quiet bay, and Edmund, dressed as a Dane, with the two Northmen who had accompanied him from Paris, landed